Hi Brave Parents! Today we are going over a list of questions you should ask before taking in a new placement. Shaun and I have a list of questions that we always ask before we actually say yes to a placement. That way we have an idea of what we're getting into and what is going on before we say yes. Before you take in a new placement, it is always a good idea to have some background information, at least as much as you can possibly get, before you say yes or no to a placement. You're going to want to know quite a few things actually before you take in a placement. That way you know if it works for your family. So Shaun and I have a list of questions that we prepared a long time ago that we always use when we are called with the opportunity of taking in a new placement. So I'm going to go through that list with you guys. That way you can make your own list and you guys can be ready for taking in a new placement and whether or not it's right for you and your family. The first question that we always ask is, what are the children's names, ages, and if they know their dates of birth? You know, the dates of birth are not necessarily super important, but I always like knowing when they're going to be the next age. I like knowing how they fall and fit into the other kids in our home. And I also like to know if they have a birthday coming up really soon, so that way we can make sure that it gets celebrated and not overlooked. I think that's really important when taking in a new placement, because sometimes in the shuffle of things can get forgotten, and I always want to make sure that these kids get celebrated when it's their time to be celebrated. And so that's why I feel like knowing the birthday, whether you know right when they get placed or, you know, even if it's the day or two after, but I always like knowing that information, so I make sure that they get celebrated on their birthday. The second thing we ask, and it's not super important, but I always like to just know background, and that is what ethnicity the child is. Now, if you're going to take certain ethnicities and not others, then that would be important for you. For us, we take in all ethnicities. We just always kind of liked knowing what ethnicity the child was. That way we had some background. Also, knowing if they have any religious practices that they need to follow, or anything that goes along, you know, any types of groups or anything that they're in, or anything that they follow because of their religion. We were thinking about taking in a group of children that were Muslim, and so they couldn't eat certain foods, and we had, you know, they wanted to make sure that that was okay with us, because we would have had to change the way we ate, and not us necessarily, but just the things that we made for those children. And that was okay with us. We said that that was fine, but it's good to know ahead of time. That way, if that is too hard for you, or if that doesn't fall into your beliefs, and you guys don't want to take those type of children, then it's good to know that ahead of time, so that way you could say yes or no depending on your beliefs. The next thing on my list is, does the child have any allergies and or like food sensitivities? We have a couple of our kids that are sensitive to red food dye. And so knowing their allergies, even if it's just seasonal allergies, so you can make sure that you have some Claritin on hand. If it's food allergies, that's really important to know, because, you know, you don't want to feed those children something obviously that they're allergic to. Food sensitivities are good to know. I know when our kids that are sensitive to red dye, when they get red dye, they get very hyperactive. So knowing allergies is really important. The next thing we ask is, where does the child go to school or daycare? So in some states, the children will move schools depending upon where they're placed. But in Nebraska, they try to maintain as much normalcy as they can for the kids, and so they end up going to school where they're already going to school and you have to drive them there. When Shaun and I first took in our group of, well, they were 5 at the time, they were going to school about 45 minutes away from our home, and they did not want to move them at the time. They thought that we would be able to move them in the future, but not at that time. And so we had to decide if we wanted to take them to school and then pick them up, because it was a 45-minute drive each way. And so we did end up doing that. Sometimes they'll give you mileage reimbursement or gas cards. That way it helps offset some of that cost, but you just have to know if it fits in your schedule on whether you can drive them that far or not. Also with daycares, we have been able to move the daycares to a daycare that was close to us, but that is something you're going to want to ask just in case they tell you that they can't move. Another thing that goes along with school and daycare is what their schedule is. So what time do they start school? What time do they get out of school? Do they have after school care? If you're going to keep them at their daycare, is there certain hours they go there? Do they have a schedule they follow? Knowing those things are going to be important, especially what time they start and get out of school. That way you know if it fits in your schedule or not. One really important thing to ask is about medicine. Now, we've had kids that come with medicine and we've had kids that did not come with medicine. Some kids had 1 medicine and some kids had 5. So really knowing if they take medicine and what they take the medicine for, so that way you know if that is something that you are willing to take is going to be important. Also, knowing if the children have any contact with their birth family. Some kids can have contact, some kids are required to have contact, and some kids cannot have contact. So knowing that, and then also if they have visits. So if they have visits with any of their birth family and what that schedule looks like, that way you know if it fits in your schedule. Sometimes they'll have transportation, and then sometimes they'll expect you to be transportation. So knowing if that works into your schedule and with your family is going to be important. Knowing where that visitation is held, how often, and questions like that are going to be important to ask, so that way you know if that's something that is feasible for you and something that works out for you. These next 2 are things that go along with a previous video that we did on knowing what placements you want to take, or being able to pick or choose what you want to take and knowing ahead of time. So asking these questions, what behaviors they have or what notable behaviors that they have, and also if they have any medical concerns and if they are on track developmentally. Knowing these things, we have some kids that can be medically fragile. There are some kids that just have developmental delays, and there are also some children that come with behaviors. And so asking that, so that way you know if that is something you want to say yes to, is going to be very important. So that question is definitely one of the most important ones, because then you're going to know what you're looking at, and you can make a more educated decision on if that placement is going to work in your home. You're going to want to also find out if the kids have any appointments that have already been scheduled. They may have a therapist that they see on a regular basis. You need to know who the therapist is, where it's at, what that time is. All these things are important to know to find out if they work in your schedule. Also, knowing if they have any doctor's appointments that are scheduled or need to be scheduled. We've had kids that come and we can take them to our doctor, and then we've had kids that come and they want us to take them to the doctor that they've already been seeing. So knowing where that location is at and if that works for you, knowing when those appointments are going to be, and also knowing if it's something that you need to schedule because it hasn't happened yet, and so you need to make that appointment. But knowing if you can use your doctor or if you have to use their doctor is also going to be an important question. Make sure to also ask about Medicaid. All of the state wards come with state health insurance. But sometimes it hasn't been set up yet. Sometimes they can give you a temporary card or number. That way you can have that if they haven't received their Medicaid card yet. But knowing how you're going to get services, that way if something happens in those first few days before you actually have their Medicaid card, in the state of Nebraska, they will fill out a form that has their name and the caseworker's signature, and then it has their number on it that they've been assigned, and we would carry that around with us just in case. And that was just before we got our card, and then usually about a week later we would receive an actual card for the child. But asking that way you're prepared in case something were to happen. The last question is find out if there are any special routines or anything else that they are aware of that you should be aware of. Usually these kids will not come with any special kind of routine or anything, but sometimes they're placed from other foster homes. And so they may actually have a routine that they do follow, or maybe they have a special teddy bear or something, that the previous placement knows that helps calm them or anything like that. I also like, if they are coming from a previous foster home, to ask if it's okay to contact the previous foster parents. That way we can talk about what they saw and what helped and what didn't help. I always think having the knowledge from the previous foster parents is important. Sometimes, they don't want to be contacted, and that's okay, we respect that. But getting any information that we can get, I feel like, is always super important. Thank you guys for watching our video today. I hope you learned something new. If you have not yet subscribed to our channel, click here to subscribe to our channel. And if you haven't seen our 5 tips for welcoming a teen placement into your home, click here to watch that video next. Bye!